to the Cārvāka podcast. As promised, I've finally decided to do a podcast on Kashmir. You guys had sent me a lot of emails कि कुशल तू podcast क्यों नहीं कर रहा है कश्मीर पे, and you know my nature. I usually tend to start a little slow, but I'm here finally, and I'm very happy that I have Aarti Tikoo with me today on the podcast. So if you guys don't know about who Aarti Tikoo is, she's a senior journalist in the Times of India, and she's written a lot over the years, not just on Kashmir, but on a multiple number of issues. And recently, if you guys were watching a lot, in mainstream media, finally Aarti actually came on mainstream media. Aarti never comes on mainstream media, but so you would have seen Aarti, discussing a lot about her experience and her ground report on Kashmir. So Aarti, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kushal. Thank you for inviting me. And this was really long overdue, and I'm glad that we are finally able to do this.
All right. So Aarti, let's begin with this. You spent, I think, a week or 10,
more than that, 12 days.
10-12 days in Kashmir. So let's begin with the process, where let us divide it into two parts. A is, what do the intelligentsia per se in Kashmir? Obviously, when you went there, you must have seen two sides of it, right? There is the intelligentsia or the elite class in Kashmir. What is their reaction to 370 and 35A now? 370 being written down and 35A basically being null and void because of the writing down of 370. And what is the reaction of, again, we divide the reaction of people into three parts. There is the reaction of the Kashmir Valley itself, and then there is Jammu, and then we have Ladakh. So what has been your experience?
Kushal, like always, Kashmir is a multitude of experiences. It's not one or the other. It's not black and white. Often people tend to have a very linear approach to Kashmir. You pick a side and you drive that narrative through your reportage, through your work. But I was trained in the traditional school of journalism, wherein I had to look at all kinds of voices and I had to speak to all those voices. Besides the categories that you mentioned, about intelligentsia versus non-intelligentsia, there is one more category of experience in Kashmir. The voices that you hear during peacetime and the voices that you hear during violent times. So there's an entire range of experience that you come across in Kashmir once you are on the ground. Then, of course, there is a Kashmiri voice which is inside homes, and there's a Kashmiri voice which is on the streets. So you will find a completely polarizing picture once you talk about those two different voices. In Kashmir, if you speak to somebody on the roadside or in a public space, you will hear most often a voice of rage, a voice of disappointment, disillusionment, dejection. And that's what I heard on Kashmir on August 5th, when New Delhi decided to bifurcate the state and reorganize it into two union territories, thus invalidating Article 370 and Article 335A. Now, if you went, like I do have friends and I have a large network in Kashmir with whom I connect at a personal level as well, because I am from Kashmir and I can speak the local language. And I have access to people at a personal level. If you spoke to people at that level, you will hear a completely different picture from what I saw on the streets. People inside homes, I would say many of them, I wouldn't say all, because as I've been saying, the reality in Kashmir is gray. It is not black and white. A lot of them said that they were finally relieved. They were, a lot of them said that we may not be entirely happy about the decision, but we are relieved that at least the confusion is over.
Balatali kind of.
Balatali. And perhaps it will lead to peace in Kashmir.
Interesting.
So that kind of perspective is there in Kashmir indoors. You will not hear this perspective in public spaces. Then, of course, there is a perspective in the upper class of Kashmir. If you met the elite class, the business class, there were two kinds of views. One view was that, all right, now that we are a union territory and there's no 370 and 35A, does it mean that we will have to compete with the rest of the country's businesses?
That's interesting.
Yeah. If that is going to be Kashmir's new reality, how will we be able to cope with that, business competition?
So kind of a fear of free markets.
Exactly. So they are looking at it from an economic point of view. Will they be able to survive that economic competition? And then, of course, the middle class businessman is wondering if he would be able to survive, trader from Punjab. And this point of view is not limited to just Kashmir. You will find similar voices in Jammu, similar voices in Ladakh as well, where people are now constantly worrying about jobs and businesses from an economic point of view. Then, of course, if you go to the separatist hub in Kashmir, you will not hear really about 370 or 35A. You will hear different voices. You will hear the same voices that you heard in the last 30 years.
True.
You will not see, for example, if you go to downtown, where some of the protests did happen after August 5, the narrative that you will hear there is not, constitution has been undermined, or we were not asked, or they are not going around in the protest with the state flag, which was the flag of plough with 3 lines on a red cloth. You will actually see flags of, say, ISIS. You will see green flags. You will see Islamic flags. You will see Pakistani flags. So that is a very different narrative altogether. They are not really protesting against 370 and 35A because to begin with, they did not even recognize that.
Yeah.
They did not believe in the Indian constitution. They did not believe that Jammu and Kashmir was a legitimate part of the Indian Union.
Yeah.
So to begin with, they had a big question mark on the constitutional relationship that existed between New Delhi and Jammu and Kashmir. So these are the nuanced realities. This is not one reality. These are multiple experiences and realities and voices that you will hear and come across in Kashmir.
All right. So to take it from what you've mentioned, this is very interesting. If, say, the person on the street, would there be a scenario where the same person, when you ask that person on the street, would be like, nahi, humko ye bilkul pasand nahi hai. And maybe if you take them in an alley where they'll look around here and there and be like, yahan koi nahi dekh raha hai, and then they will come out. That is there a kind of a self-censorship too? Did you experience that?
Absolutely. Self-censorship in Kashmir has been common, and it is a post-1990 phenomenon. And if you really look at some of the sociological studies that have happened in conflict zones, one of the most prevailing and seminal theories of self-censorship was fear, intimidation, threat, and violence. In fact, some of the brightest academic minds, even in India, would acknowledge that intimidation causes self-censorship.
True.
It's a spiral in any society. If a certain bully comes and holds a gun on your head, you will shut up. And that's what has happened in Kashmir, because you don't know whom you are surrounded by. You don't know whether you're surrounded by an ISI agent, whether you're surrounded by Lashkar-e-Taiba militant, JKLF militant, or a Hurriyat, spy. You don't know whom you're surrounded by. You don't know who your neighbor is, whose connection he, is going to exploit to eventually, get you. So I'll give you an example. I was interviewing a group of people in Srinagar where everyone was outraged and they were abusing Prime Minister Modi, they were abusing India, they were uh, completely in a fit of rage and saying that this is unjustified, this is illegal, this is unconstitutional, this should not have been done. India did a major, injustice to Kashmir. After a while, some of the people left that spot, and there was one person who stood by. And he told me, ma'am, the truth is that people hate India here. And I asked him, do you hate? He said, ma'am, no, I don't hate. I said, then what do you mean? You just said, and he said, no, ma'am, other people hate. And I said, how long can people hate? And he said, ma'am, this is it. These people don't understand. They are stupid. But this is the same person who was part of that entire discussion where everyone was outraging and fuming and fretting. But the moment he was in that private space with me,
the real self comes out.
Yeah, the real self came out saying that I'm not somebody who hates or who will cause violence. And even in that group, after a while, when I pushed these people, I kept asking them, okay, you are angry, you are frustrated, you dislike what Delhi has done. What will you do now? You will be surprised. Most people said, ma'am, what can we do? At the most, we will protest peacefully, but that's it. We don't believe in violence. So this understanding of Kashmir, you will not have if you don't know that domain area, if you don't know how people react in a group or individually. So there are so many levels and complexities that you have to understand the Kashmiri mind in a conflict, because conflict throws up its own challenges.
Yeah, that's a very true reality, and as actually in a way, it's a sad reality of everybody in India or in a poor country like ours. I mean, we're not even middle income, and in that kind of a scenario, sometimes I wonder, Kashmiri aadmi bhi yahan banda bhi kya karega? At the end of the day, what is that Kashmiri going to do? The Kashmiri at the end of the day, आजादी के नारे या इधर उधर चिल्लाना, or maybe stone pelting might be a job for some people over there, but not for every Kashmiri. You can't have that case. So in a scenario like that, now let us compare it to the government response also, because and I'll touch upon the international media coverage as in the later section, but let us now look at the work of the government of India too. Obviously, there has been a consistent now, it's been now 22 days of cell phone blackout, more than that, almost a month now, maybe. That there is no cell phone coverage in Kashmir. And I mean, as people like you and I who genuinely consider ourselves as liberal or libertarian, where we've always been historically against for free speech, and we've been historically standing up for rights of everyone. So in a situation like this, and you being a native Kashmiri yourself, so how did you find this, this aspect of when you spoke to the people of Kashmir about this aspect of the Indian government or the Indian state? Doesn't matter which state is there, whether Congress, BJP, NDA, UPA. So how was the reaction to that? So what were they talking about? Were they concerned about the cell phone blackout? Or
yes, you see, generally whenever there has been a violent crisis in Kashmir, phones and internets have been shut down. So this is not something unique or exceptional in Kashmir. Except the fact that this has been, I think, the longest longest lockdown in Kashmir. However, people are used to this, entire phenomena. They know that if there's a crisis, there will be a shutdown. In fact, if you remember in 2016 when Burhan Wani was killed, the government did impose certain restrictions, but Kashmir on its own voluntarily shut down the valley. And it was not as if, the entire valley wanted to shut down, but the separatists, the militants, the entire network that works in tandem with militants across the border, which is Pakistan, that entire ecosystem imposed a massive shutdown on the entire valley. And therefore, people are used to that kind of shutdown. Now, this mobile and internet, whenever it's shut down, people have always felt enraged about it, because it's become a necessity.
Yeah.
People of your generation, my generation, we cannot sort of even live without mobiles and internet even for a day. And it is very hard, given the fact that we are dependent on so many things, whether it's finances or whether it's interacting with your family, friends. We don't see each other often, but we interact with our relatives and friends on phones and mobiles. So even in 2016, I remember there was one crisis, a Hanwara girl crisis. It got stretched for, I think, almost for a month. And I remember running into a mob in 2000. This is way before Burhan Wani was killed. I remember I ran into a mob, and the mob asked me, who are you? And I said, I am a journalist from Times of India. And the only thing that they told me at that point of time was, we don't want Indian media here. And I said, all right, okay, I understand, you're angry, but I have come to do a piece on this kid who was killed in that, crossfiring. And they said, that's fine, but we don't want anything. All we want is internet. So that was the response, and it gave me an insight into how the Kashmiri youth who is born post 1990 is so engaged and connected to the rest of the world, and wherever they are drawing inspiration from, they are interconnected only through the internet, and they are also able to mobilize mobs, writing mobs, violent mobs through the internet, because it is the quickest means to mobilize a mob. So that is why people at that time also wanted internet back. And even today, I think if you ask random youth in Kashmir, more than even phone, they want internet, because internet connects them to the rest of the world. And that is, I wouldn't say that it's a phenomenon restricted to Kashmir. It's a phenomenon globally, related with the youth.
Yeah. So, if I was to play, I don't know why, but I mean, as a libertarian, I should not be doing it, but I'm still going to try to look at it from the government's or the state's perspective. When you have, it's not like Kashmir this is not just another state in India.
Yeah.
It is a special circumstance. Now, if we were to have a scenario where, okay, the government would not have shut down the internet, for argument's sake, let's say the government gives you the internet, everything happens. And then the internet would be used to, enrage mobs, enrage stone pelters. Word spreads like wildfire. And then you have people losing lives. In the scenario of the state gets abused both ways.
Yeah, which I've written about.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's actually a catch-22 situation. And the counter to that was, Abhijit Iyer had written an article about it, that, sometimes shutting down the internet can also be counterproductive from a security point of view too for the state. So do you think, as of now, the state, Kashmir is never going to be normal, at least after such a big decision. Nobody in their right mind will say, oh, everything is hunky-dory in Kashmir. People are holding hands and walking on the street singing Kumbaya. But in a situation like this, for how long can an Indian state actually avoid this kind of a scenario?
See, this is a question that only the security agencies can answer in absolute honesty and sincerity. But the very fact that I'm using the word security means that the entire responsibility lies on the shoulders of the security agencies. In 2016, despite restrictions, Kashmiri youth who were affiliated with separatist groups, who were affiliated with militant groups, they did come out and they paralyzed the entire state, because for a long stretch the internet was allowed, mobiles were allowed, and they were able to mobilize youth. And And after a while, once there's a momentum of youth, you don't even need the internet, you don't even need phones, you are on your own. It's on an auto mode, kind of a project. Now, in this scenario, I do feel that, an entire community is being, pushed to the wall. They are suffering because of the lack of, communication and mobiles and internet. But I would say that, after a month, the silver lining is that there are no body bags. And that, as a Kashmiri, as a citizen of India, as a conscientious journalist, I feel that that's a way, way better scenario than a scenario where you have 1 or 2 or 3 kids getting killed every day. Now, for how long can the state do it? I don't think, it can be indefinite.
Yeah.
I don't think you can, shut down the channels of communication for the rest of the year or 6 months or even 3 or 4 months. But, and I think that realization is within the security agencies as well. That's why they have already restored mobile phones in North Kashmir, which is relatively seen as more peaceful than South, because South is where you have the concentration of militant groups, you have the concentration of separatists and Jamaat-e-Islami, which is rabid, also a banned group as of today.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have also restored landline to see how it will, impact on the security of the place. So I think they are going on this in a very phased manner, and I think that is the right approach to see how they can, maneuver through this with the least collateral damage. I know there is discomfort, there is inconvenience for the larger number of people, but I think at the end of the day, if there is no violence, if we are able to minimize the loss of life, I think that I would really go with that.
So it's actually somebody on the live chat actually asked a very good question. Ajesh Philip has asked, do you see the government of India finally incentivizing people who are sympathetic to India? I think he's meaning from the Kashmir Valley, not from Jammu and Ladakh.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting question.
Well, I think there is a paradigm shift in Kashmir policy in New Delhi for sure, because for the longest time, the way Delhi looked at Kashmir was, anyone who was making the loudest noise about separatism, he was brought to the table, he was being heard, he was even given the high chair on the table, including terrorists like Yasin Malik, if you remember.
Yeah.
There was the Vajpayee era, there was the Manmohan Singh era, wherein from militants to separatists, everyone was being heard. But there's a paradigm shift in the last few years. The Modi government changed that entire policy. The separatists and the militant groups as of today do not have the same importance and significance and legitimacy that the Indian state had extended to them through probably because there was a different understanding, the different regime in New Delhi, which looked at Kashmir issue from a different lens, different perspective. So I think the government of India as of today will certainly incentivize every Indian Kashmiri Muslim in Kashmir as of today.
All right, cool. Now let us move from, people tend to forget that, the whole Kashmir also has Jammu and Ladakh. Sometimes I feel kind of annoyed too and irritated that in the entire discussion, I'll give you an analogy of a class. Sometimes in the class, there are 40, 50 students in a class, and the entire focus of the teacher of the class is always on those 2 kids in the back, are always shouting all the time. The 48 kids are just sitting in the corner and saying, yaar, hum bhi hain bhai, humko bhi padha de thoda sa. Kind of the scenario. Sometimes I feel, because I have family in Jammu, and that's what they keep telling me.
Yeah, Kushal, I got the point, and that's why I was saying that there's a paradigm shift. That's the reason for absolute indifference towards Jammu region and Ladakh region was because New Delhi had a certain perspective and policy, a mindset towards the entire issue. The only people who got importance in New Delhi were the separatists and the militants. So there was a kind of a blind spot.
Yeah.
Wherein you couldn't see that there's an entire population in Kashmir, an entire population in Jammu and in Ladakh who are not really in alignment or agreement with the people who have been raising the slogan of Azadi in Kashmir, or the slogan of Pakistan, or Nizam-e-Mustafa, and all those slogans. That has changed because India realizes that after 30 years, after 25, 30 years of pursuing a certain policy, we haven't really gotten anything. In fact, we have lost lives in Kashmir. Every Kashmiri Muslim who stood up for India was killed by Pakistan, by ISI, by jihadi groups, and he didn't get anything at the end of the day. So that has changed. That's why I think the reason they bifurcated Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh is because Ladakh doesn't have any issue. Ladakh does not really have the same sentiments as Jammu and Kashmir. Therefore, they really need their own space. They need a pace of development that it has not seen until now, and that's why I think they're directly under the control of Delhi now.
All right, now let us go into the second half, which is actually very important. That the coverage of Kashmir. You've been a part of the coverage of Kashmir, but I mean, I remember on Times Now you were talking about the Wall Street Journal, reporter who was with you at the time when you were in Kashmir, the valley itself. Now you look at New York Times, you look at, and I'm giving you a point of view of actually as a consumer of news. Look, for me, you're a journalist, you provide me information. Similarly, a Wall Street Journal provides me information, New York Times gives me information, or even some media outlets in India, for that matter, give me information about what's going on over there. And if I pick up the paper, let's say if I was to read the report of that Wall Street Journal reporter, and then I pick up your report, or just look at the coverage of the BBC in general, what is the truth? I mean, at the end of the day, if you were to look at it from the point of view of an average consumer, like even in the live chat, somebody had just mentioned that, I'm sitting in Canada, but I would love to know the ground reality from someone. I mean, the very person asking this question itself reveals the confused state we're all in. So what do you think? I mean, why are there so many multiple versions happening here?
It's a very important question, and as I was mentioning at the very outset of this debate, is that Kashmir has multiple realities and there are multiple voices. However, what happens is, if you are a journalist who has worked on the ground for several years and you understand what the domain is, what the complexities of that place are, you're going to approach the story from various aspects. But if you are coming to that terrain for the first time, or if you're coming to that terrain with a certain perspective in mind, a preconceived notion in mind, not necessarily prejudice, or not necessarily bias, or not necessarily a political agenda, but if you're coming to capture a story, in your mind there is a conflict in Kashmir, right? So you will pursue that story from a certain angle, from a certain perspective. You want to know what the conflict is. So you're going to talk to that conflict industry, right? You will go and you will try to approach either. So there are three ways to do it. One, you will approach the local journalists. Local journalists in Kashmir, everyone knows, most of them have been supporting the cause of separatism. They have been open about it. They have openly supported Hurriyat, Gilani, and all these characters who are part of the conflict. So whether we can look at them as neutral journalists, I'm not really sure, because if you're justifying violence, I don't know how professional you can be. Now, when a foreign journalist comes, he either speaks to local journalists, and the local journalists will take him through his sources, his network, or that foreign journalist will go to the separatist hub. That he will approach the area where he has found out that there is some kind of writing or protest. So he will go to that area, he or she will try to speak to those people, and you will hear the voices of outrage and anger against Indian state. So you will write from that perspective that this is what's happening. There is massive violence, there is massive outrage, but what that foreign correspondent overlooks is that the 99% of the valley is cooperating with law and order agencies. They are not out on the streets. Why I'm trying to make a distinction here between these two groups or two populations in Kashmir is if there was really a consensus about that feeling, that unanimity, that we are all anti-India and we are all for Azadi, we are all for separatism, we are all for Pakistan, then you would have seen 7 million people on the streets. You would not have seen 700 people on the streets. You would have seen the entire valley coming to protest.
Or a significant portion of the valley.
Yeah, or a significant portion. Like, for example, if you look at look at the number of, or the optics of the Hong Kong protests.
Oh yeah,
right?
That's a good analogy.
Exactly. So you have to understand, where is this protest happening? And who is driving that protest? What are these symbols of that protest? As I pointed out, the protest is not concentrated on the separate flag of Jammu and Kashmir state. It's not concentrated on the 370 debate or on 35A debate.
Yes.
It is concentrated on separatism from India. It is concentrated on jihad. It's concentrated on Nizam-e-Mustafa. The symbols are religious. The symbols are not constitutional.
Yeah, they're not about secularism. They're about Islamism.
Exactly. So they're not about democracy. They're not about governance. You have to, after a while, you have to scrape the surface. And once you do that, you will realize that underneath, it's a different protest altogether. It's like, Egypt.
Yeah.
After a while, initially the Arab Spring, everyone went gung-ho about Arab Spring. And after a while, people realized that it's a different kind of popular uprising.
Fair enough.
It's not about liberal democracy. It's not about governance. It's about something else.
In a way, you've actually answered. Somebody on the super chat had asked me this. So Blinky Blue, thanks for the super chat. They had asked, what are BBCAJ, I think it's Al Jazeera and New York Times, earning by spreading hate against India? I mean, lives are at stake right now. So it's also, they're concerned about people. So I think Aarti has pretty much given the answer, because I don't think so even Aarti is in a position to enter their minds and really decipher what they are doing it and what. But I think Aarti has mentioned that, there is a particular pattern in the report.
There's a pattern, and then the foreign journalists who do come, they do not come with a contextual understanding of the terrain. They don't come with a cultural understanding and also the political understanding, because any political process or any political issue, it's like an umbrella. You have several, spikes in that umbrella. If you're going to look at only one, you won't be able to understand the entire umbrella. You will be able to understand a slice of it.
Yeah, it's a classic example is, I've lost the keys and, I only look for the keys where the light is on.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a classic analogy there. You're just going to, so they've already made up their mind that this is what Kashmir is.
Yeah.
Okay, just give me the one dude or the dudette over there who was going to basically talk about my preconceived notions, and so that I can satisfy myself. So another super chat, thanks a lot, Sasidharan Karthikeyan. So he has asked that when would the Kashmir situation become safe so that Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmiri Pandits, should be resettled there? Could you see any development at the ground level now in the foreseeable future?
Well, I think that should be the last of our concerns, because at the moment, what I, as a journalist and also as a citizen, think what should be the priority of the government of India is to restore some kind of normalcy in Kashmir. You have to reach out to people who are disillusioned and dejected, because there is one voice in Kashmir which is saying that at least we should have been consulted, at least we should have been spoken to. So you have to reach out to that constituency. You have to so there are also anxieties and concerns. As I pointed out, that there are economic anxieties. There is another anxiety that are we going to now see an influx of every beggar, in Kashmir?
Yeah.
There is also a concern about environment. Are we going to ruin the landscape of Kashmir, just because there is a certain constituency in the heartland India who are who have an anti-Muslim prejudice as well. So there are those concerns. And then don't forget, some of the people in Kashmir are seeing this entire issue from a Hindu-Muslim perspective.
True.
They are seeing that India right now is being governed by a right-wing Hindu political party.
Yeah.
And they are seeing this as a project of, as an extension of Hindutva project. So the government has to reach out to these people. They are not necessarily anti-India. They are not necessarily anti-Hindu, but they have concerns. They have fears that, are we going to see a kind of a cultural invasion, an environmental invasion? So I think Kashmiri Pandits should be the last subject in the list of priorities that the government of India has.
And to be very honest, how can you settle someone in an unsettled area?
Exactly.
It's like you're going to give them as a live bait to people over there if you try and settle them right now.
Well, I'm saying that first, the government of India must address the concerns of the people. First, you have to speak to the non-violent population of Kashmir. 99% people are staying indoors. They're not violent. They're not protesting out on the streets. So you have to first address them, because they are living there. Then once you have restored some normalcy, then you can talk to then you can think about Kashmiri Pandits, then you can think about Jammu, but first you have to address the concerns of the people who are living right now there and suffering the blockade.
Yeah, true. But if I was to play devil's advocate here, don't you think in a way, and I know you don't play the victim card, and I know that, and that's something which I like about you too. But if I was a Pandit, I know you are a Pandit, and I'm playing the role of the devil's advocate of a Pandit with a Pandit, but I'm going to do that. So a Pandit would say, what was my fault in all of this? Why can't I go back to what is my real home?
Agreed. But Kushal, we have to look at the issue practically. The fact is, most of the Kashmiri Pandit people right now living in Jammu or other parts of the country, they would like to see a secure Kashmir, right?
Yeah.
They would like to go back to a normal Kashmir.
True.
So that's why I'm emphasizing on the word that government has to first restore a certain normalcy in Kashmir. No Kashmiri Pandit would like to go to an unstable Kashmir, to go to a violent Kashmir where they are, being treated with hostility.
True.
And are not seen, as, one among their own.
True.
So you have to create a certain atmosphere and a conducive atmosphere for their return.
Yeah, true. That's a very valid point. Now, let us shift from the reportage to something which we were originally going to talk about when you were first going to come on my podcast. So let us talk about this angle. And this is something I've always admired about you, that you never play the oppression card. Yeah,
Yes.
So I'll tell you. So in the oppression Olympics, I mean, the world is governed by the left-wing point of view these days. So everybody is a victim. So if we were to look at the oppression Olympics, you'd score very high on the oppression Olympics card. So you are a Kashmiri Pandit.
Yeah.
You're genuinely uprooted not voluntarily, involuntarily, by force from your homeland. You're someone who used to live there and you were forced out of that, your own homeland, your own property. You've seen family, you've seen damage to your family, lives have been lost, brutality with your own eyes, and you're a woman.
Yeah.
And you refuse to play the oppression card. I've never seen you. I mean, I know you personally. You've never done it when we are, either having a coffee or a chai or whatever, or we are having dinner, or you've never done it on the internet too.
Yes. Well, I have to credit my parents for that. I was raised with a certain set of values wherein I was told from the very beginning, when we got displaced and we had nothing, we absolutely had nothing. One of the first lessons that my father taught me was that I have to fight for myself because we have nothing, we have to survive. And the second was that I shouldn't thump my chest, because the moment I do it, I won't find my true strength. So this is the value set I inherited from my father. And the second thing I think that really shaped my personality in the way I did was the fact that, my father is fundamentally a liberal Kashmiri Pandit. He's an artist. He comes from the progressive movement of art in India. And he was part of the progressive movement of art and literature in Kashmir as well. And his worldview was that there is no difference between men and women. So he comes from that school of thinking. And he taught us that. He gave us the same kind of freedoms as boys in our society got. So I didn't really see myself in a gender prism while I was growing up. So I always thought that I'm an equal to any boy in the classroom, or I'm an equal to anyone out there in the field. When displacement happened, the only lesson that I got from my father was that since you are equal, since you are not an oppressed woman, you have to fight like a man. So I never got that, sense of persecution. Even if, whenever I thought in my mind that we are being persecuted, my father was there to hold me back and make me realize that since he gave me the same rights as, anybody else in society got, I can't really complain now. So that, sense of equality and egalitarianism was drilled into my head, that I never played that card. And I think one more point I want to make, this acute sense of dignity was again drilled, because since we were refugees, we had nothing. Part of my family was ended up in a refugee camp. My father insisted that we spent our weekends and summer vacations in refugee camps with the rest of the family, so that we understand what our family is going through. So along with that, he drilled into our heads this sense of pride and dignity. We were raised with those values, that dignity is the most important thing. And there is no dignity in chest thumping and victimhood. So we consider victimhood or persecution complex as the worst form of degrading yourself. That's where it all comes from.
But do you think, I mean, I'm like you in a major way too, but do you think somewhere down the line, because Kashmiri Pandits did not play victim as a community too, as much as, imagine, I just sometimes think of this scenario. Here is a community that was literally butchered and kicked out from their homeland.
Yes.
Not just, I'm not talking about from a 90s, 89 to 92 period point of view. I'm talking about historically. Let's get real.
Yeah.
Everybody knows the history of that damn land, what it was and what it became. But still, the Kashmiri Muslim is the victim.
I think this Muslim victimhood and Muslim persecution complex, it's a global phenomena. It's not restricted only to Kashmir. If you look at the rest of the world, and I think it flows from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. It flows from the post-World War II history of the world, where Muslims saw themselves as victims of Western imperialism, right? The only problem here in Kashmir here is that after independence, when Jammu and Kashmir became part of India through instrument of accession, and Sheikh Abdullah in 1952 sort of, in a way, betrayed Nehru because he felt that he could have a state to himself and he could be the king of that state. When that happened, a new sense of victimhood evolved. A new sense of persecution complex was sowed into the fertile soil of Kashmir, that we are being persecuted by New Delhi, we are being victimized by New Delhi, we were promised. So the entire narrative on which separatism was built, it was sown in 1952, 1953.
True.
So that is the source of that victimhood that, we've been, despite the fact that Sheikh Abdullah was I think in the entire subcontinent, he was one of the first, or probably the first, who did land reforms in Kashmir. He took away land from the rich elite class of Kashmir, which included both Hindus, Sikhs, Dogras, Muslims, and he gave away that land to peasants in Kashmir. He, of course, he created another class of elites in Kashmir, but a certain victimhood developed after 1952 because there was a rethink about the decision that Kashmir had taken in 1947 by joining the Union of India through instrument of accession. So that is why that persecution complex. And then the mainstream, political parties in Kashmir, they played on that victimhood complex.
Yeah, because it sells.
Because no, not just that, it sells, but it kept them in power.
Yeah.
It makes
them relevant.
Yeah, it kept them in power. It was the blackmailing tool that they used with New Delhi, that, we are a Muslim majority state. We could have gone with Pakistan, but we chose to be with India. And yet we are being treated like this. We're not being given what is due to us. So that kind of, persecution complex got so calcified and so deep-rooted in society that it's now almost impossible to bring it out.
True.
Yeah.
It is. It is true.
Yeah.
So a couple of people have asked questions on the super chat again, and one more question from Blinky Blue is that 4 people have been killed so far, and Abhijit Iyer said that the homicide rates will go up if the curfew is lifted in, let's say, 1 month. Do you think the murder rates are potentially going to go up? I mean, do you think there are chances of that?
Okay, so first of all, there is no curfew in Kashmir. I want to clarify that.
That's why I asked this question specifically, because I like this question.
There is no curfew in Kashmir. There has been no curfew from day one. What has been imposed in Kashmir is a restriction on gathering, people in a group. So assemblies of people are prohibited as of today.
Okay.
People are, however, free to move out, carry on with their businesses, go to schools, colleges, whatever. It's a different matter that people voluntarily are not coming out because there's a sense of fear and there's a sense of insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if these restrictions are lifted completely, will there be violence or no violence? My sense is that once the restrictions are completely lifted, there will be minimal protests, violent protests, and those would be restricted to the parts of Kashmir which have been traditionally violent. I don't think that these protests will go widespread or they will burn the entire valley. I feel that there's a sense of responsibility that has already crept in Kashmiri society over a larger society. I don't think Kashmiri society is unwise to the extent that they will send their children to the streets and get them, caught in a vicious cycle of violence.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they're humans.
Yeah, exactly. But the areas which have been traditionally violent, I think there will be some kind of violence. There will be, I hope there are no body bags, but I can't be really sure because there are areas which will remain problematic for not just Delhi, but for Kashmir itself for, I think, a long time.
All right. So one more. Thanks for the super chat, Guru Chetan Prabhakar. He says, what did the Kashmiri Muslim kid think of the Kashmiri Hindu community in the early 90s? And what does a Kashmiri Muslim kid think of them now? It's obviously a general societal question. And is there a need for change in that idea? If yes, what should be done for the same?
Well, the Kashmiri kid in the pre-90s and post-90s, there are two different generations altogether. Post-1990 Kashmiri kid has no experience of coexistence whatsoever.
Yeah.
He does not even know what it was like in the Kashmir that I grew up in. I saw syncretic culture turning violent through the 80s, Initially, for example, I was in fact, raised in a Muslim household for short periods whenever my mother was busy at home and there was something or the other at home. She trusted her Muslim friends to look after me. My father, for example, was also, and his friends were raised in each other's houses. So there was that Kashmir also, which we enjoyed and which we relished and celebrated. But then there was another Kashmir where you suddenly didn't even trust your neighbor. You didn't know whether he was putting your name out there on the hit list of the Kashmiri Pandits who were to be killed and targeted.
Wow.
So we saw an entire spectrum of Kashmir going from peace to violence, from syncretism to radicalism. So we saw all of that. Now, post 1990 is a different story altogether. A Kashmiri kid who was raised in violence, who was raised in, there was a stretch of early 90s when there was massive human rights abuse by the security forces, because the security forces were not really trained to deal with that kind of a crisis, to deal with insurgency. It was a different culture, different place. So initial years, there was abuse. And due to that abuse, an entire generation did get affected. They got even angrier than they were against India. So that also happened. And then, of course, this entire generation, which was fed nothing but Islamic radicalism. So that generation is also there, which celebrates ISIS. There's a generation that eulogizes Zakir Musa, who opened the local provincial chapter of Al-Qaeda in Kashmir. So Kashmir is complex. So there, I would say, and then there is another generation which got exposure in mainland India in the last 30 years, who is sort of familiar with the coexistence of the rest of India. But then there is another generation who is also seeing some of the lynchings over, cow slaughter, the entire debate on cow vigilantism, the entire debate on Gauraksha. All these things have happened in these last 30 years. It has affected Kashmiri psyche in many ways. There are positive aspects and then there are negative aspects as well.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So Aarti, before we wrap things up, I have to cover this last aspect with you because it's got to do with I think something where I suffer from, and you definitely suffer from this problem, which is the growing tribalism online. Look, here's the thing. I'll give you a scenario. So you got a lot of flack from the Hindutva side for your views on Sabrimala.
Yes.
You get a lot of flack from the left for your views on Kashmir and Islamism.
Yes.
So sometimes it's as if, in the online world where all of us exist now, the world of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, luckily there is podcasting where, there is nuance and you can have long form discussions. But how do we deal with this growing online tribalism where you're either this or that, especially as for a journalist like you, whose job is to just look at what is happening?
Yeah.
I don't believe in there is no such human being as an unbiased human being. We all have our biases.
Yes.
But the thing is, when we give our reportage, the key is we be honest about our biases. And we, the thing where I think the left has lost the plot, in my view, overall globally, is the left assumed a sort of a moral superiority and a monopoly on the truth itself, where they lost it. And the reaction to that was a very crude sort of reaction on the non-left, where tu ja rahe kind of a thing, main teri sunni nahi hai. In all this online tribalism, the truth is a victim. And, people like you and I, actually, who might fall on a lot of liberal values and agree with the liberals on many things. And sometimes we agree with the other side too. I don't like to call them conservatives because I genuinely believe India does not have a conservative side. India has different shades of the left. Some like the cow, some don't like the cow, like Arun Shori says. So what do we do? People like you and I and Abhijit Iyer and many of us who just want a good India, and maybe we differ, like you and I differ on the Rohingya issue.
Yes,
we've been very open about our discussions on Twitter and maybe offline when we've discussed. So what do people like us do in this online tribalism?
So Kushal, I really feel that the only way to defeat online tribalism or even tribalism in our, lives outside the virtual world is by constantly pursuing the line of thinking that we have been. Because if you shut up, if you do not push your line of thinking, and if you do not speak out there in public domain, the chances are that the radical elements, the chances are that the left and the right they are going to occupy that space. And that is why it's very important for people like you and me who are fundamentally liberal. Our understanding, our upbringing, our value system, it's fundamentally liberal. And that is the constitution that we inherited from our founding fathers. The India that they envisioned is a liberal India. It is not going to be a conservative India. It cannot be a conservative India, because India is the idea of future. The idea of coexistence is an idea of future, right? The idea of multicultural, diverse, and then living together in harmony is the idea of future. Therefore, it is important for us to stand up, speak up for ourselves, push our line of thinking, so that the tribes which are trying to drag us, in one or the other tribe, we sort of, push them back. So the whole idea is push back these narratives which see reality in black and white, because reality is not in black and white. It is quite gray, right? And our core, whether it comes through the constitution or whether it comes from the innate culture of this place, of the geography of this place, is liberal. So
that's what I tell my Hindu friends.
It is liberal. The historical idea of India is liberal, and it will stay that way because of people like you and me who stand up against the tide.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I always say this whenever I have these discussions with, I personally don't associate with Hindutva anymore. Although there was a point of time where I had, kind of explored Hindutva intellectually. I mean, I think until and unless you don't explore something intellectually, you really don't get it. So I did explore Hindutva for a long time in my life. And when I eventually got in a comfort zone where I don't feel, it's not that I'm very anti-Hindutva, I just don't feel comfortable with it anymore. But I would still sit, a lot of my friends are Hindutvavadis. I don't think they're bad people even today. They don't think I'm a bad person even today, even after I say that I don't associate with it anymore. But I always tell them one thing, that even if what you call a Hindu Rashtra, that will be pretty much a plural Rashtra, right? You can't, if you want something Hindu, you have to accept the variety in it.
Yeah.
You can't be Hindu and say एक ही चलेगा, यहाँ इडली चूज कर या डोसा, भाई सारा खाते हैं, हम तो buffet वाले हैं. Even our religion is like a buffet.
Yeah, we are a thali. We are a thali. We're a classic thali which has multiple dishes.
Yeah.
And then there is rice, and then there is chapati, and there's also papad.
Yeah.
So we are the classic thali, and we will as a culture prevail like that because we have for thousands of years.
Yeah.
So I have no doubt that India's secularism is fundamentally a feature of the geography.
Yeah.
It cannot change.
Yeah.
We will remain the same people because that's the value, the value system that we have grown up in.
Yeah, and I always say this, that if there's one thing that I would always want to fight for till the last breath in my body, has always been the fundamental pluralism of India and the fundamental diversity in India. And this is the reason we have so much beauty in this country, where a Nastik like me can go to a ISKCON temple and enjoy the Aarti, eat the prasadam, and still see no divinity in the Murti at all. And they have no problems. They even know that I am that Nastik. I mean, the Pujari knows, ye to Nastik hai, magar ye aata hai. And you cannot explain this to maybe an atheist in the West because they don't have our experience over here. But somewhere down the line, I get worried at times in this cacophony of noises and voices online that we are losing our innate Hinduness. And that's what worries me.
Yeah, I mean, there is that fear and concern that, we are imitating the Western, Abrahamic, dogmatic culture in a way that we are losing our own moorings. And I think that's where civil society's role becomes very significant. That's why it's important that kushalmehra goes out there and, speaks his mind. That's where an Aarti Tikoo has to get up and she has to speak not only for Kashmiri Pandits, but she has to speak for Kashmiri Muslims as well. And that's been, my philosophy, my principle in life.
Yeah, true. I think we could not have ended this podcast on a better note because, it is as positive as it gets. So guys, once again, thanks a lot for all the super chats. I really appreciate all the questions today. You guys really asked a lot of good questions. If I missed, I don't think so I missed any good question today. So once again, I'm grateful to all of you. And Aarti, thanks a lot for doing this. This was long overdue. So ye to mera hakka banta tha.
Thank you, Kushal. Thank you, everyone.
So guys, please subscribe to the podcast, like, share it with your friends. And if you have any other questions besides this, you have the comment section. And also one more thing, and I've not updated the description of the podcast, but I'm going to, attach a link to all of Aarti's works, all her articles in Economic Times, Times of India. So please go and click on the link and read all her articles, share those with your friends too. And on that note, I would like to say goodbye. Take care. See you next time.
Thank you. Whew. 1 hour?